Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Together's podcast, Thrive Together. I'm super excited about today's episode because we're talking about our new program, Host Homes, and we have some great guests. I'm Megan Darrow, the executive director of Together, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm going to have our guests and my co-host introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tammy Lathrop. I am the director of the Host Homes program here at Together. I use she, her pronouns. And a little bit about our program. We just launched early January 2022, and Host Homes is a program that houses unaccompanied high school students in the North Thurston and Tumwater school districts with volunteer host families in Thurston County. I'm super excited that I get to introduce our guests today. We invited Jay Banks to be our special guest to talk about the program and some of the things that we can do to support youth and youth voice. I'm thrilled to introduce Jay Banks, who is a transplant to the Olympia area from Washington, D.C. Jay is an Afro-Latin non-binary queer educator and artist who we invited today to discuss about their experience working with LGBTQ plus youth and talk about how Host Homes can support and affirm youth voice in our program. Jay, welcome. And
Hi.
Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here and to talk with you all about a bunch of different stuff. But my name is Jay. My pronouns are they, them. I have been an early childhood education teacher in DC, and then I moved here to Washington to be a facilitator advocate for support groups for LGBTQ youth, and was the executive director of Pizza Clutch for a couple of years. And I'm just very passionate about creating supportive environments for all youth and for adults as well. And super excited to talk about the Host Homes program because I've been hearing about it for a really long time and have been spreading it all around town.
Yes.
Because I think it's going to be really helpful and important for the youth in this area. So thanks for having me.
Well, and Jay, you were part of the beginning conversations while we were developing the program.
I was.
We sought your advice and counsel early on. So
it's such an honor.
Yeah.
It's such a dope program.
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So I'm just going to jump right in. And this question is for Jay and for Tammy, both. So in our past episodes, we covered, who are, the unaccompanied youth in our community. We talked a lot about the disproportionality of homeless youth, right? That LGBTQ plus and BIPOC youth experience homelessness at a higher rate than their white peers. And I wanted to ask, what are some of the barriers facing students finding housing options?
Yeah, first of all, in our community, and I think across the state as well, there are just very few options for minors and to find housing. In our county alone, in Thurston County, there are 2 shelters that will take minors in. Both those shelters, though, you would still need to have a legal guardian or parent sign off for you to enter that care.
Yep.
And, that's a scary situation for a lot of youth. They don't necessarily want to be in a shelter situation. Other options are, of course, living on the streets. Mm-hmm. These students, as we discussed in the previous episode, are students who have been in the same school district. They're embedded in their community. To live on the streets is not really an option for them. So they're kind of flying under the radar, right? They're couch surfing, staying with friends for small amounts of time. But outside of those options, there's not a stable place for them to be.
Yeah. I've had a lot of experiences with students in my past work with Pizza Clutch who were kicked out because of coming out or things like that, and who didn't really know where to go, and I'd have to be the one to give them resources. And like you said, I only had 2 options,
right.
And one of those options makes it so they can't use their phone while they're there, which cuts them off, like you said, from their community and things like that. Also is looking to reconcile with their families, which they might not be at that place at that time. So if they need that emergency housing, but then are told and you also have to talk to your family, it's well, this isn't helpful. I've even had experience of sending students to a certain place and then they've experienced harm there as well. I think other barriers are also just the limited resources they have to be able to then take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Some students don't have jobs or access to money or capital and things like that, and they do have a intense drive to want to be independent. There's other students I've talked to who've like asked for advice on how to get emancipated and all that kind of stuff like that. But that's a whole process that, again, they don't have the resources to figure out how to do that.
And takes time.
And it takes a lot of time. And again, you might be asked to reconcile and things like that. So I think, yeah, all of those things are barriers to them being able to find a safe place to just kind of exist when they're already probably going through a really hard, traumatic time. Yeah.
Absolutely. So along those lines, why is it important to understand youth who identify as LGBTQ plus or exploring their sexual orientation and or gender identity and affirm their identity? What does that look like?
I think it's important because hopefully it prevents the next part. About like being homeless or kicked out of their home. If we can kind of stop that and create a space of affirmation and acceptance, then hopefully they can stay within their homes, because that's ultimately what everyone wants, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
You want the youth to be able to be with their family, to be supported, to be loved, all of that kind of stuff. But if that is not happening, then we need to create more spaces for them to find that affirmation. Other people that they can go to be accepted. I'm not going to get the stat exactly right, but it's evidence from the Trevor Project's national survey that they do like every 2 years, and their recent one came out. And I always look to that because it's like telling you what the youth are experiencing and what they need. And if they have one supportive adult in their life, that greatly reduces their risk for suicide compared to folks who don't have any of that support. And it also goes the same for the community that they live in. If they have a supportive community, that also lowers their risk for suicide.
Right.
And it just shows the correlation between just having someone who's like, you are okay to exist and to live, for that student, that young person to want to continue living. And when we take that away, either as family members that are in their home or as community members that interact with them, it makes them feel alone, it makes them feel wrong, and can lead to things that are even more detrimental, you know?
That's right. And Jay, that kind of brings up, we were just having a conversation about this, the importance for everyone, I mean, not just students, but in particular students, to have that sanctuary, which typically should be your home, outside of all the other stresses that students face in their life, going to school, preparing for adult life outside of high school. And when they're not accepted in the home that they're living in, we're seeing those kids and the barriers that they face trying to navigate living their truth, being accepted by family who, let's face it, we all want to be loved and accepted by a family. If it's not our family, maybe it's a chosen family. But what that does for a student when they're able to just relax, what that does for their nervous system, how they're able to be more successful in their life when they can just have a place that they don't have to worry about people judging them or not accepting them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that to answer the second part of like, what does affirmation look like? It's really the simple, like small stuff, you know? Even though I think that kind of the conversation in like greater media where it's like left versus right, it's like, oh my God, you're asking me to use new pronouns. That's such a big deal. And it's like, it's not.
Yeah.
It's language, you know,
Right.
and language evolves and changes. There are multiple different languages out there that have different ways that they refer to people. A good amount of them don't have gendered language, you know, stuff like that. And so the small thing of just like practicing, just act like you're learning a new language and just practice. Like hear somebody say my pronouns are whatever they are, and just try to incorporate that. Like it's the small things that I've heard young people and students talk about that mean the most.
Right.
Like their grandparent using the right name for them. when they hadn't before, and that will change their whole view. And like, oh my God, I can see that person's trying. I think that folks put a lot of pressure on themselves and get in their own way
Yeah.
and are too worried about messing up, when it's like, all you have to do is, if your youth brings over a friend who's got like a wacky hairstyle, just be like, yeah, that person's cool to be here, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
That is a way to show and affirm that like that person is a person, and whatever they're doing with their life is fine, because it doesn't necessarily impact you,
Right.
Yeah, so I try to tell, especially like parents and guardians, that like it's not a huge deal. It's just incorporating small things into your life to show that you're a welcome, opening space.
I love what you said about just making the effort and practicing, because I think you're right. Some families that I talk to are hyper vigilant about not making a mistake. So therefore, they're not using the language because they don't want to make an error or offend somebody. But I think that the majority of people that I talk to are students, if they can see that effort and it's genuine and just apologize and move on,
Yep.
that's all that it really takes.
Yeah. And sometimes you barely need the apology. Like, one thing I give, because a lot of people ask me about pronouns and things like that, and they're like, do I apologize? And I'm like, that you're kind of making it worse. If you like overdo an apology,
That's a good point.
The thing is, just move, like correct yourself and move on, because if you're being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, then like
You're making a big deal.
you're making a
about
big
it.
deal out
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
And you could just be like, just catch yourself and be like, I said she, I meant they. All right, cool. We're keeping going,
Yeah,
right?
I love
Everything's
that.
still chill. Yeah, because that pressure, I think, will cause you to just like stick your own foot in your mouth constantly, and also puts the onus on the person who is ever marginalized in that position to be the one to comfort or to be like, no, it's okay, or things like that, and then become a teacher rather, when they might not want that space. There's a lot of people whose jobs it is to be a teacher in that sense, a lot of
Right.
people who have made it a part of their kind of journey to be like, I'm going to take the information about how I identify in my community, I'm going to share that out, and we have tons of access to that now with the internet.
Right.
I think that along those lines too, what are your thoughts about, just having individualized conversations with people too? I'm thinking about it from the host perspective. I mean, it's perfectly fine to have a conversation with a student about what their preferences are, about their comfort level, and sharing maybe the host side of things, like, hey, I to be honest with you, I don't have anyone in my community who identifies as LGBTQ plus or trans or queer, and then therefore you're not making an assumption about a whole group of people because we're telling you this one thing today. Ask, right?
Yeah, I think just opening up the vein for more communication, especially in like a host situation like that, I think it's more honest, and I think it shows both sides that like, hey, we're both in a place where we're growing. And I would hope that would mean that like both are excited to grow together, and not necessarily rely on each other, like, in a codependent way or anything, but just like being open about, we're kind of in the same space, and being more accepting of the growing pains that are going to happen because of that.
Right.
I think for adults, it's hard to admit that we don't know something. That's like the scariest thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's out of our comfort
It's
zone.
out of your comfort zone. A lot of people are like, act your age, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter how old I am. I still have so much to learn. Like, our brains are done cooking at 25, all right? And we're giving a lot more adult responsibilities before then that we're supposed to figure out. So, like, of course, it's going to take some extra time. I don't care. If you're 60, you still got a lot to learn. Technology has happened,
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. So I think if we're all more honest about that, I think that's really important for young people to see, because they feel a rush to be ready, especially if you're in a really tough situation and you have to grow up.
Yeah.
If you have to grow up because your family has decided they will not take care of you, you're going to feel behind all the time, even though you're already years ahead of your peers.
Right.
And so then being allowed to be in a space with an adult who's like, guess what? I haven't figured it out either, but I'm down to figure this out with you and to help you grow as a person as well. And maybe you'll help me grow. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I would say that when I was a teacher for my pre-K students, I'm like, you guys are going to teach me stuff too. Like, even though you're 5 years old, you've got a lot going on in your own life that I don't know about,
Right,
And
and
my
that's
first
helping
graders,
affirm their voice at a young age.
exactly. Like my first graders taught me all about dinosaurs. I couldn't pronounce any of the names, and they could, but they really enjoyed like being able to be a teacher and being able to teach me something. And
Yeah.
that's a good thing for your confidence, you know.
Absolutely.
I love that. So another question we have is, why is it essential that we listen to and center the voices and experience of queer, trans, and BIPOC youth? And how can the general public do better at that? Like, what are you seeing we're not doing? I mean, you kind of touched on some of that, but what do you see we could do better at?
I think, gosh, it's hard because I want to be like create more spaces for folks to, you know,
Right.
share their voice.
Yeah.
And I think we do have a lot of that. And I think there needs to be more, but there's something about kind of the way that points of view get shared where it ends up in a silo, right? Like if I'm thinking about social media, which I'm not really on social media anymore, but at the time where I was, it's like, I mean, I've cultivated a space where the views that I agree with and that, you know, make me feel good and things like that, those are plentiful. But
Absolutely.
anything I am like, I don't really want to see that, whether for my safety or just because it annoys me, I can like kind of dismiss or block or
filters
push
out.
or filter
Yeah.
out things like that. And so I feel like, yeah, we have a lot of voices out there, but I don't think there's a lot of people who are allowing themselves to hear it. So I think for me, I'm always going back to the being open, like realize that growing is uncomfortable and it's hard and it's challenging and it sucks. But if you want to be a more open person, if you want to see more of the world just in general, you have to open up your mind. It's super easy to be comfortable and stay in your spot. And for a lot of us, it's safer that way. You know, like if you've
Right.
been hurt, if you've been traumatized, you don't want to go out.
Yeah, you don't want to be vulnerable.
Yeah, it's scary stuff.
Yeah.
But it stunts your growth. It stunts you from seeing the things that suck in the world, but also what's really beautiful about it, which is the diversity of life. Like I feel like as humans, we've forgotten that like animals and insects, like there's millions of them, you know, and they're all different.
Yeah.
Even though we
Yeah.
put them in categories, like how many different kinds of sheep are there? But we've like made it so that we don't see that about ourselves.
Yeah.
And that
That's a
makes
great
it
point.
yeah, that makes it really tough. So I think listening and opening up yourselves to the views of like LGBTQ folks, BIPOC folks that are a mixture of all of that, who have a different kind of self-awareness about who they are in the world. I think that people are afraid of what that'll open up about themselves.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
there's a lot of like, oh my God, they're trying to, it's a trend. Everyone's just seeing that everyone's trans. And so they're deciding to be that. And it's like, no, I think a lot of people sit with that for a long time.
And
You
they
s-
finally feel safe enough.
Exactly. You finally open up yourself to like, wait, the complexity of who I am is so much deeper than I thought before.
Right.
And I think there are a lot of people that are afraid of what happens if they look a little deeper inside themselves by
Yeah.
like seeing other people do that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
It reminds me of a conversation in our last podcast. We talked a lot about that, you know, if you're not uncomfortable, right, you aren't progressing, we aren't growing. And that isn't, you know, your comfort isn't the same as, you know, being safe. And like when you make space for others, it doesn't mean it takes your space away, or you make space for different perspectives or different ways of being and knowing yourself, right? It doesn't mean you don't know yourself, right? And I see
like
adults,
that.
well, I see adults like do that,
Yeah.
you know, like, well, you don't know. And it's like, actually, you know,
Yeah.
actually they do. They
Yeah.
do know, right? And to believe youth, right? Believe youth's experience, believe their identity, right?
Yeah.
That they know best themselves, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a great point. I mean, if you really take the time to remember how you felt at that age, you knew yourself. I mean, that's what I always remind people is like, didn't you think that you knew who you were at this age and that you had an idea about your preference or, you know?
Yeah.
And so why is it now you don't allow the same grace for the youth that are in your life.
Yeah. And even if that shifts and change over time, it's like, well, people can't be different. Come on.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, exactly.
Like how many things did you like when you were younger that you were
Right.
then like, oh, I guess not anymore, you know? And
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
accept
for
that
sure.
about yourself.
Or you thought you were going to do this career and
Uh-huh.
it led to something else. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Life is way more fluid than we give it credit for. You know?
So in our Host Homes program, we really want to educate and vet, obviously, the hosts that are going to be housing students. And it's really important to us to make sure we are keeping students in a safe, affirming home.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot we can do in terms of just educating folks out there, but are there other things outside of the box in terms of like just telling people information that you would suggest to enrich their life and help them have an understanding? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's like books and like movies and
Oh yeah, don't get me started on those. Like we'll never stop.
Yes. Yes.
There's all kinds of things, but that is the very first thing is like other than being open, because you got to be open to do this next part. Like look for media around those like folks. So like LGBTQ plus media, we've got a lot of that out there.
Yeah.
I definitely I will recommend one.
yeah, please do.
The cutest, most adorable thing I've seen it's on Netflix. It's called Heartstopper. It's a very like cute love story between two boys in like in high school. It talks a lot about like bullying, about coming out, and there's like trans issues in there, all surrounded by these like teenagers kind of living their life. So it's a lot of like, it's very realistic to the like my own experiences as a queer and trans person, and also what I see working with youth. So, and I've recommended to parents before, and then they're calling me and they're like, oh my God, that was the cutest, most romantic thing I've ever seen. And it's like opened my mind up. So like engaging with the media and history that already exists, I think is a really good first step, because like representation is important, not just for the people that it's representing, but for the people who it's not, so that
That's
they
right.
can,
Who are consuming that.
who are consuming it, so they can learn a little bit. And the other thing that I say for like guardians and parents is like, I always come from the assumption that you're already this, but continue being attentive and loving and supportive to your youth. Like that is like just because their identity shifts and changes, don't change that about how you're dealing with them, right? Be attentive and trying to see what their needs are. And
Be interested
be
and-
interested and just be loving, continue to be
Yeah.
loving,
Yeah.
especially when they tell you something about themselves that you didn't know before, because that takes a lot of trust, and it's a pressure, a situation. And then the last thing with that, oh gosh, what is it? I had it on the tip of my tongue and then it left. But just that part of being accepting, like allowing folks to come in who you might not have expected, and just kind of showing that you're trying, it's a two-way street. I think there are some times where youth do expect more out of the adults in their life than the adults have, and so just trying your best. I do think being honest about where you are with your youth, and trying to find a community that can support you in that as well. Other people in your own group who you can confide in, who you can talk to about what you're struggling with. Because we want to be honest with the youth about where we're at, but we're not going to share all of our struggles with them.
Sure.
Yep.
So
I love that. I mean, it just continues to amaze me that every single podcast we've had, if you've been listening, has talked about relationship and community, right? Depend on your community, build community, be in relationship, show up, right? Show up for these kids. And that looks like, being interested.
Yeah.
Right? When they are, when they tell you something, know what an amazing, gift that is, that you are their trusted person and that you are part of their community. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like people miss out on that. Like they try to separate the lines between community and family.
Right.
Like those are two different things.
Yeah.
But it's the same, it's the same
Absolutely.
ultimately, except you're just like living with one.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. My middle schooler would be like, you are not part of my community. Yeah. You know, I mean, they go through that, right? They're like, ooh,
Well, it's
ew.
growing pains, you know?
Yeah. But I'm like, but I am.
Yeah,
I
uh-huh. We're in
love
this
you so
together.
much. And he's like, that's why.
Yeah.
You can't be here. Yeah.
Too much love and support.
I
I
know.
can't handle it.
Yeah. I think if I was to tell hosts too, like, I think there's a lot of like, you know, teens can be scary, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, they be judging you, what you're wearing, what you're eating,
They make you feel
what you
so
look
uncool.
like. You're like, dang, why are you so mean, right? And they forget, like, that is teens,
Yeah.
right? That is teens.
Yeah.
And you got to love them through that,
Yeah.
right? They are not going to look at you when you talk to them. They're going to keep their hood up,
Yep.
right? You're going to say, how are you doing? And they're going to be like, fine,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Uh-huh.
And those are all fine ways to be
Yeah.
in the world, right?
Yeah.
Those are all fine ways to be in the world, and you got to love them through it. And that don't take it personal, right?
Definitely
Just,
not.
right? And
Just keep showing up.
right? Just
Yeah.
keep showing up. You
Yeah.
know, make them mac and cheese. You know, like buy
They'll break
them-
out of it, you
yeah,
know,
they'll
eventually.
they'll come out of
And then
it.
when they
Yeah.
show something to you more than that, be so honored that
Yeah.
they are. And
Yeah.
remember the courage it takes for a young person to disclose any part of their personal
Yeah.
life with you.
Right.
Yeah.
I was reading an article too about just teens in general, that it's a time in your life as a parent or as a guardian or as an adult that you need to show up as your best self, right?
Yeah.
You got to be stuffing those emotions like, that hurt my feelings, but
Yeah.
I'm going to love you anyway, right? Or, you know, like, why don't you want to spend time with me, right? Like, just, you know, let that shit go.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're looking for their independence, right? And they need to flex those skills. And that's a time for us as adults to, you know, put our best selves forward. And also they know when you're not, and like apologize.
Yeah.
Like, I really messed up. I'm sorry I raised my voice. That alone keeps a relationship with a youth strong, right? Like,
Yeah.
we don't always know best, and we definitely don't show up as our best every day, right? But we need to show youth that vulnerability, that like,
Yeah.
adults mess up.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's good modeling so that they know, like, if they mess up, if they yell at you one day, that they can also come in and be like, I'm sorry. I don't know what was going on.
Right.
Like I've even, that's a thing that I'm still learning as an adult, you know,
Yeah.
in community and in relationship with people, like having to kind of rebuild what I learned. Cause I don't think I had a great example of how to handle conflicts and stuff like that. So yeah, just, getting that little bit of vulnerability to like help build the relationship of like, I'm going to let you be yourself and you're going to let me be myself. And we're going to always just try to come back together because this will ultimately make one, you know, living with a teenager easier because it is hard, but it's worth it, you know, to help. I think that's like, you're investing in who that person's going to be. I think that's what it is with parenting. I'm not a parent. I've just been like pseudo parenting kids for a really long time in
Yeah.
all of the different spaces I've worked in. But like you think about that and like you're investing in this person and who they're going to be when they're older, when they are independent and they might not need you. And like, that's a heavy thing. And so like, don't you want to put your best effort into it and be as honest about how like complicated life is, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I love this conversation, Jay. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, good to see
Yeah,
you.
it's so good. And I just love, you know, the host program, and that together has been entrusted to, you know, to have this program along with, you know, with our community, because it isn't just, you know, together doing this. It really is a whole host of people who are caring for our community and for our youth. And so I'm going to ask you a question that we ask every guest. And we've already talked about some of these concepts, but what does building community as an act of resistance mean to you?
I think the biggest part that is resistance is the building community part. So I was thinking about it earlier today, and I'm like, we, especially like folks living in the States, we like, it's a very individualistic society, you know, unless you're from kind of a specific minority group that has very deep, like community-based, you know, family models. And so I think just doing that, just being like, no, I will not be an individual. I will rely on my community. I will work with my community. I think that is like the biggest act of resistance, because you're kind of fighting against like what they say, like the American dream is, and like all of that kind of stuff. But on top of that, I also think that working together with people who have the same values and mission as you, and like everybody's putting in some kind of effort. It doesn't have to be the same, but just some kind of effort towards that same goal, I think kind of flies in the face of a lot of what we've got going on in the world right now. You know, just the trying to hold out to really make sure that everyone can get to the same place. It's very much, I think we're kind of in a space of like, I got to get there first. I got to gobble up all the resources. And that, I mean, it's not working. I don't think it's working for anyone. I'm a person who's currently struggling because I don't have enough resources and things like that. And what has the past couple of months have shown me is that like I had to lean on my community just to continue surviving. And that's the first time I've actually really done that, because I've been told for so long to not do that. So
Right.
for me, it's been an act of resistance just to like rely on people close to me who other than myself know what's best for me as well. And that's, I think that brings another piece of that vulnerability back. It's hard to be vulnerable and to rely on community and to ask people for help.
Absolutely.
And we're told not to do that, you know, to be strong, to survive on our own, all that kind of stuff. And so resisting that and being like soft in a positive way, I think is like the biggest form of resistance, even for yourself individually, to like
Yeah.
fight against the cop in your head that's
Yeah.
always telling
Yes.
you that you're not doing enough, and stuff like that. And you
Or
know,
that you should be able to do this on your own.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a thing I'm still learning every
Yeah.
day.
I
Is
love
how
that.
building community for me and myself is an act of resistance against everything I've been taught as like
love
a Black queer trans person in this world, you know?
Yeah.
Totally.
Wow. Yeah, you're really the first person who talked about what that is to undo, you know, individualism for yourself, like as an act of resistance, because it is an act of resistance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Do you have an organization, change maker, innovator, system disruptor that you're watching or listening or learning from that you'd love to give a shout out to?
I feel bad because I have a couple.
No, that
Let's
don't
hear
feel bad
it.
at all.
Let's hear it.
Yeah.
Especially now because I've been reminded of some things. But I know that you've already had an episode with Pizza Clutch,
Yes.
the organization that
Yeah.
I was working for. I very dearly love their mission, everything that they do in bringing direct support to youth in schools. I think it's very important, and I've just seen firsthand the impact that it has, because it is it's to change for the students, but also for the whole school in general. It's that like representation right in your face, the support directly for the students. Like I love that place so much. And I also think other initiatives that are happening in this area are super important to highlight. I haven't been able to check on it, but before I took a break from just being in the Olympia area, I know that the Black student unions at like
Yes.
River Ridge was doing a lot of activity.
Yep.
They were super inspiring to see like the past couple of years, the amount of like passion that they have in like making their school a better, safer place. So definitely keep an eye on the Black student unions of the various schools in this area, because they're working together. They're building
Awesome.
community, and
Yes.
they're doing that really, really important work. And then, of course, Host Homes, because I've just been obsessed.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And I think that in conjunction with like what the youth are doing, and with places like Pizza Clutch and Together, and you know, the anchor communities, I think all of that together is going
Yeah.
to really help change what life is like for youth in this area, and make them a lot safer.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I was saying before we went on camera that all of these things will be so cool if we can get out of our way. Like
Yeah.
the providers, the politics, if we can just get out of the way, right? Host Homes is a youth choice program. Like youth are choosing to be housed in this way. And I think that that's a very different kind of model than we have looked at before. The Black Student Union working with North Thurston Public Schools and holding adults accountable for all kinds of things this last year has been incredible. During a time when communities were really volatile, they really stood up and they stood their ground. And I love that space that they're taking. Like, that is what we need. And we need to listen to it and affirm it and not try and squelch it, because we do have people in the community that are trying to quiet it down. And look at what happens when we have students build community in that way. We get some pretty rad stuff coming out of it. And of course, our friends at Pizza Clutch. I mean, we talked in an episode with Pizza Clutch about that Together and Pizza Clutch use schools as a place to connect with youth, and I love that we have that in common. And Pizza Clutch is amazing. And when clutches are present in schools, you see the difference. It is, of course, that support for the students, but you see that and those values trickle out into the school, and I love that so much. Yeah. So I have a last question, which is, if I am a potential host, and I want to host a student, what should I know about youth so I can listen to them and affirm their identity and create a container where adults are there to support them in their goals? I want both.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we really touched on this quite a bit already, but it's always good to really, hammer this out. Is number one, showing up.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything really outside of being there for a student, cheering them on, even if you're not actively cheering them on, just being a safe place where that they can be themselves, right? So also, I loved our conversation earlier about respecting them, being vulnerable, telling them where you're at in your journey so that they feel comfortable enough to tell you where they're at, and then just learning from each other.
Yeah, definitely. Being open, being vulnerable, and also searching for your own community. There are places available, there are organizations, there are Facebook groups, there are all kinds of people that you can engage with to ask questions, to become better at being, an affirming space for your youth if you feel like you need that.
Right.
There's lots of places that you can go, but make sure that, we're always learning about, internet safety and media literacy and stuff like that. So be careful as you're searching for things. Like, definitely try to go to trusted sources.
Yeah,
right.
But, look in your area. Like, of course, like PFLAG's been, a group that's been around for forever, and they're still around. They're still helpful. And there's lots of other spaces popping up. So, go search for that. If just kind of listening and learning isn't enough. If you need to be in community with other people, and if you need that kind of interaction, it's very helpful.
I love that. I was going to add, in the last episode about host homes, we talked about like a parenting versus mentorship role, right? That I feel the way that we are really talking to potential hosts is like, these kiddos come from families, right? Guardians, parents. What they're looking for as they are, growing into adults is more of like a mentor, right? And what does that look like to hold that space, right? Very different from, this is how I want you to live your life as a parent. Like, these are my values, right? These kids are coming from sets of values in their own families, and learning about those values and accepting those values, and not necessarily trying to, parent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So really the hosts are, like you said, mentoring them, like modeling behavior, asking the youth what their goals are and finding ways that they can support that. And I think, it is a tricky line between the parenting and mentoring, because of course these are a lot of them are minors. So you are keep parenting to, in a sense, keeping them safe. But I think just being very mindful that they do have family. You're not replacing anybody. You are helping them create a space where they are able to focus on going to school, graduating school, possibly finding a job, possibly helping them learn some of those independent living skills,
Yeah.
you know, so that they can be successful on their own when they graduate our program.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're the like rad cool aunt or uncle.
Yes, I love that.
Sibling
I love
of the
that.
parent type
Yes.
of thing, but with maybe like a slight bit more responsibility.
Yeah.
you know?
Yes.
Yes.
As a rad, cool aunt myself, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too.
I'm definitely of the mindset of like with my kids, my sister's kids. I'm like, yeah, you can bring them to me, but I'm going to give them back. So I feel like
Always.
you know,
Yes.
but I do still take the like. I would like to show my nephews kind of like the different
side.
you know, the different
Yeah.
vibe of life
Yes.
of growing up.
Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you got a little bit of that. You know, if you interact with the youth in your life and you want them to think that you're like cool, but not in the like, I'm super
Trying.
yeah, you're trying too hard, but the like this is like I've lived life and I'm doing pretty all right at it. Like that's I
Yeah.
feel like that's the vibe you gotta have.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. I think also for hosts, I'm going to do this one thing because I loved this from the host episode where it's like, who are these kids, right? Not to make assumptions that because they are struggling with houselessness, that they don't have dreams and goals and that or skills, right?
Yeah.
Or and they do, right? I mean, they are artists, they're musicians, they're mathematicians, right?
Yeah.
They're coming to us with a whole amazing kids, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's an assumption that I would love to, break down in our community because I think that's how we're not solving houselessness is that
Yeah.
we're othering people and we're not seeing and affirming that, they are part of our community. We are that community. They are our kids, right?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, so I have to wrap up. So this question is for both of you. Tammy, how can people best support the work of Host Homes? For those listening.
Yeah. I mean, number one, consider being a host.
Yes.
I think
Please.
We
that
need hosts.
reach out. I'd love to talk to anybody that has questions. What I've heard a lot about from the community is like, oh, interesting about this program. Like I always told my kids if they had a friend who needed a place to stay, that they could stay with us. If you feel that way, you could definitely be a host home, with way more support than you would have on your own. We could help engage, in a multitude of ways. I'd love to, chat with you about that. If you're unable to do that, totally understandable. Talk about our program. Maybe there's somebody in your network or your community that you think would be interested. Send them my way. Share this podcast. Share our information on social media. Join an informational meeting to learn more.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of call-ins with the people in my life. Like we talk a lot about homelessness and houselessness, and we need the community to step up to solve it, right?
Yeah.
And we have a very tangible way to do it here. Host a youth. I think that it will be enriching for both the host and the student, and I think that's something I would like the community to hear too. So I'm going to wrap it all the way up and say thank you so much, Jay. It's so nice to see you. I said in an email, I was like, oh, we run into each other. And then here we are running.
we go.
I was like, oh, yes, we are going to be sharing community and conversation. So that's just how my brain works sometimes is I don't look that far ahead. So I'm so glad I got a chance to see you now that you're back.
Yes.
Tammy, thank you for taking on this program, right? I mean, this program is big. It's a big lift, right? It's Together's first time housing youth. And you're doing a great job. So thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks for sweating it out on the couch. I know that Tammy and I both have the same feelings about speaking on camera. But I think this went great.
Good
So thank
conversation.
you. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Jay. We
thanks
really
for having
appreciate
me.
it.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be here, and this is like the stuff I love talking about. So I'm very honored that you invited me here, and glad to see you both in
Yes.
person and to chat. It's been really fun.
Yeah. And for the listeners, in our next episode, we're going to be talking about Clubhouse in our bilingual Spanish-English program in North Thurston Public Schools, and talk about intersections of language, culture, identity, and youth development, and why those things are so important to Together's work and building community as an act of resistance. So with that, we're going to say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.